أصحاب السمو والمعالي والسعادة، ضيوفنا الكرام، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أنا محدثتكم ميرا المطوع. يسعدني ويشرفني أن أرحب بكم اليوم باسم مؤسسة سلامة بنت حمدان آل نهيان في ثالث ورشة عمل لرعاية الأطفال الصغار. ورش عمل رعاية الأطفال الصغار هي عبارة عن سلسلة برامج تفاعلية لمساعدة الآباء والأمهات والمسؤولين على رعاية الأطفال في تعلم المبادئ الأساسية التي تساعدهم في تربية أطفالهم. يتم التحدث فيها من قبل مجموعة من الخبراء في مجال التربية في المرحلة المبكرة لحياة الطفل من جامعة ييل. وقبل أن نتعرف على المتحدثين، اسمحوا لي أن أطلعكم على نموذج سير برنامجنا لهذا اليوم، حيث سيقوم المتحدثان بإجراء حلقة نقاش تفاعلية، ومن ثم سوف يفتح المجال لاستقبال أسئلة الجمهور. في ظل جهودنا المستمرة لتطوير وتحسين برامجنا، نرجو منكم التكرم بتعبئة استمارة التقييم الموجودة على مقاعدكم. ولمن يرغب في الانضمام إلى حلقة النقاش أو الفوكس جروب مع أحد الخبراء من جامعة ييل حول ورش عمل رعاية الأطفال الصغار لمدة 30 دقيقة، نرجو منكم البقاء في القاعة بعد نهاية ورشة العمل. والآن لنبدأ برنامجنا. عنوان ورشة عمل اليوم هو دور الآباء في تنشئة الأطفال الصغار. سيقوم بتقديمها كل من الدكتور كايل برويت والدكتورة مارشا برويت. يعتبر الدكتور كايل برويت طبيب متميز ومؤلف وباحث وأستاذ في الطب النفسي للأطفال والتمريض، حاصل على جائزة التعليم مدى الحياة وعلى جائزة الإنجاز مدى الحياة. الدكتورة مارشا برويت هي أستاذة العلوم الأسرية في كلية سميث للعمل المجتمعي. تشتهر دولياً بإسهاماتها في تطوير وتنفيذ برامج وقائية في المدارس وفي المحاكم. لا أود أن أطيل عليكم أكثر، فاسمحوا لي الآن أن أرحب بالدكتور كايل برويت والدكتورة مارشا برويت.
Good evening. Marsha and I are delighted and honored to be with you. We're honored to be in the presence of His Highnesses as well. We have learned so much in our short visit in this wonderful country, and we look forward to learning more this evening. We're here to talk about a topic that I'm not sure we would have been discussing even a half a generation ago. But because of some interesting changes, both globally and in the Gulf region, we have become increasingly interested in the impact that fathers are having on the well-being of their children. There was a recent study by Byte here in the UAE about the attitudes of working fathers toward their families, and 46% of all the working fathers rated family as their top concern. That may not come as a surprise to the Emirati, who have always had a very high and deep commitment to the well-being of their families. But when men are working hard, it's easy for those priorities to shift and change. That, plus another piece of interesting data, which we have learned from the pediatricians in your country, is that they have seen an increasing number of men, particularly young fathers, some of whom I'm delighted to see here this evening, are very happy to be engaged in the care of their children in ways that some older fathers have not been. These two trends, plus a third trend, which has to do with our deepening understanding of the importance of the first years of life in framing a foundation for the well-being of a competent life, not simply a competent childhood. We physicians like to think of this young brain as when the cement is still wet, you can still work it into the right parts of the foundation so that your building will stand for a lifetime. And with all the cement trucks that I see around the UAE, I know that you're interested in getting this foundation well set. Those three forces, the changes in the role of families and women in particular, and the consequent changes in the role of men, the increased appetite in men to be closer to their children, and the importance of these early years make us say, what is the science that we can bring to bear to help families realize the potential of their children right from the beginning? So I'd like to start with a listing of some of the values that we have been looking at over many years about what makes good parenting. And I know you have your own ideas. And in some of the meetings that we've had with families here in the UAE, we have asked for your input as well. We got some suggestions last night, which we'll share with you as we look at this list. Mothering and fathering well at any age, not simply at the beginning. Be sensitive to your child's needs. When is your child hungry, or are they just tired? Do they need to be alone for a while? Do they need comfort? Do they need some limits set? The answers to those questions come in your sensitivity to who your child is and your understanding of what they're trying to tell you, long before they have their own language. Mothers and fathers, it turns out, can be quite good at this. They go about it in a different way. Sensitivity is so important, I could turn the slide off at this point and say I've said the most important thing about good parenting. But these other attributes are also quite important in terms of supporting our values about being a good parent, making children feeling adored and valued. That's not just in what we say to them, it's how we treat their bodies. It's how we treat their spirits, that we convey to them that they are our treasure. Sustaining strong values. Our family has always done this in our community, in our faith, for the poor. These are our values. We want you to know them as well. Disciplining to teach. I don't know enough Arabic to know if this is true in Arabic as well as in English, but in English, discipline often has the connotation of punishment. But in fact, if you follow the language route, it leads us back to the word disciple, not punishment, which means to learn. And so the limit setting should always be a lesson. Sometimes it might also feel like a punishment, but we've wasted what authority we have if it is only a punishment and not a lesson. Affirming the uniqueness and expecting competence. I expect you, my son, my daughter, to give the best to the world that you belong to. And I will help you. You won't always be able to do it. I'm not always able to do it. But my expectation will always be that your talent and your strength will rise to help the family and to the community of which you are part. Promoting education as a process. Knowledge as a gift of life, for life, not simply to get you through school so that you can get a job and then you stop, then you close your mind. Very bad idea. It's a good way to get into trouble and to die early. If you love education and you love it for the whole of your life, and your parents were able to convey to you, learning things is a great adventure and it never stops, we have done our job. Finally, safeguarding family rituals, relationships, and routines. Comfort in routines. When we are exhausted and confused, we turn to the routines of our life, sometimes of our faith, to help us return to a centering place at which we can be helpful. That is no less true for children. And so keeping those routines regular gives them a regularity to their life. I'm now going to ask you for the things that I've left off this list, for you and for your families. Last night someone said, you have left off unconditional love for your children. Marsha pointed out, it used to be on the list a few PowerPoints ago, but it fell off. Thank you. She watches me very carefully. We put that back on the list as of tonight, although it hasn't made it on our PowerPoint. There are some microphones in the audience, but I would be interested in hearing from you what additional parenting well at any age values you also share. can I say I'm particularly interested? Oh, here's it right here. Sorry.
Hello? Hi. I think also to set a good example.
I'm sorry?
To set a good example.
To set a good example.
Specifically between the mother and father's relationship, so that they see a healthy relationship, they see what a healthy relationship is. And by seeing that, that helps them grow into a healthier person.
So you set a particular example of how you treat each other in your relationship so that the child may value that?
Yes.
I couldn't agree with you more. That goes next. Other thoughts?
Support.
Support.
All the time.
Support, what kind of support?
Emotional or every kind of support for that child. Emotional or he could go through a lot of things through his life and he need a support all the time, I think.
Support emotional, support financial, support physical? A lot of support, yes.
It depends on the stage of his life.
Yes.
What stage is he?
It depends on the stage of life, that's right, because in infancy you support them like this. In adolescence, you support them like this. And that's at a distance, but they still need it.
Sometimes you need to ignore him.
Yes,
as a support.
that's right. Thank you, I love that addition. Other thoughts?
I think,
Yes.
I think listen to them, listen to their needs more and more often.
That
Yeah.
turns out to be harder than you expect, doesn't it? Because, at least it does for me, because it means I have to be quiet while they are expressing. It takes them a while to get their thoughts together to say what is on their mind about what they need to have happen. And I'm maybe in there too quick to teach immediately and quick fix the problem. And that's not what they want. They want to be heard. And in the hearing of them, you have honored them, you have supported them, and you might be able to be of help, maybe you won't. But you have listened, and in the hearing, that has been supportive. Any other thoughts? Yes.
I think we should allow them to be who they want to be, not who we want them to be.
Yes.
Good.
So I don't know if you
Marsha,
could all
Pruett?
hear that, but she said we need to let children be who they want to be, not who we want them to be. Yes, we have images in our mind of what our children can be, and often they don't look like that, especially at different stages. And it's important to let them find their own path.
It's a very creative problem, because you have your own dreams, if you're lucky enough to plan your children, to have them when you want them, with the person you want to have them with. That's a lot of luck. You have your dreams about who they will be. Your spouse has her dreams, his dreams about who they want to be. Sometimes those dreams are here. Sometimes they're here. And then the child has their own dreams. We'll talk about that in a moment, how that comes together. But as a good parenting competence at any age, I couldn't disagree with you. Right, one more, then we'll move on. Yes.
Thank you. Maybe nurturing a bond between the parent and the child at every point in life.
Do you want to
Yeah.
answer that?
I couldn't hear, sorry.
Sorry, nurturing
It's okay.
a bond
Yes.
bond
There's a
between
bond,
the
yes.
child and
measure-
parent.
And measure the bond and keeping track of it and keeping it secure during life. Thank you.
Especially when there are things that go wrong. They make choices with which you don't agree. You make choices with which they don't agree. And how you keep the bond strong in spite of all that. Values that all families should aspire to. But I hear a particular Emirati thread through them, and I very much appreciate that quality. So let's talk a little bit further now that we've set ourselves on some very high-minded goals about how fathering and mothering comes together or not to achieve some of those goals. Mothers and fathers do not parent in the same way, especially across the lifespan. We've already talked a little bit about that. And they don't need to parent the same way in order to get some of those values in place. You know that fathers do not mother, even when they try. I did a small study of fathers who were primary caregivers because their wives were off working, they had lost their jobs, they were home with their children. Because I wanted to know if the children were going to be okay. This was back in the 1980s. And to my surprise, as I tested these children at the age of 1 and 2 and 5 and 10, these children were just fine. The news was that there was no news. Now, they had not mothered their children, they had parented them. Were they any different? Not particularly. There were some small differences, but I couldn't say as a scientist that they were absolutely attributable to the fact that this was father care, not mother care. But these children were loving, they were confident, they were competent, they were good problem solvers. And so we had seen in that small study that even when fathers do not mother, the children are not at risk. And that, by the way, was a bit of news in 1980. My mentor had advised me not to do this study because my career was young and I shouldn't waste it on a dead-end project. He apologized to me about 30 years later, which I appreciated. Mothers don't father, even single mothers who often hear about the hunger in the child for their father, and they try to satiate or fill that hunger. They can't, and it is often a sadness for them. If they're wise and lucky, there may be some men in their family, a brother, an uncle, their own father, grandfather, who can come into the life of that child and do some paternal work with that child. And I'll tell you how that happens and why it's so important in a moment. Going back to my comment earlier about the importance of the first 3 years, I want to lean on that a little bit in a few studies to share with you why, if those early years are so important, father presence in those early years is more important than many of us ever dreamed. In many cultures, such as your own, where the father often is seen as becoming far more important in the life of his 6- and 7-year-old child than he was in the life of his 1- or 2-year-old children, there may be some changes coming, because we are now learning that when the father and the child are engaged early in the child's life, it sets the child up for a more positive life, and it also sets the father up. How does that happen? Well, there's an interesting correlation between some hormonal changes happening in the father's body. When the man becomes a father around the time that his child is to be born, his testosterone levels are going down. He's not going to be busy making any more children for a while because he's got this one starting. He doesn't need a lot of testosterone. Estrogen levels are beginning to go up. Yes, men have estrogen, but they don't use it for the same things that women do. But most importantly, there is this third hormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin is as high in a man as it will ever be when he becomes a father. It's also high at another time, when he is falling in love with his first girlfriend. Or it's also high in women. And when women are having children, oxytocin level is high because it's preparing the breast for lactation. But it's also called the relationship hormone in both men and women because it helps you fall in love with the person to whom you are intimately connected while it's high. So it's called the relationship hormone. So maybe that's what it's doing in men who are becoming fathers. And I don't know if any of the men in this room have had the experience of being sort of in the back row of the whole pregnancy, supporting your wife, maybe talking to the doctor, maybe not, but thinking this is really her job, not mine, and I will support her from the back. I will be in the back seat while she drives our family into this new world. But you meet your child, you hold them while they're still wet, and all of a sudden you're madly in love with this little piece of tissue. How did that happen? Oxytocin is the culprit. It is there to help put you in a mood to take ownership of your experience in this child's life. Because imagine the benefit to the family of you being in love with that baby. Not only good for the baby, but good for the family. High incidence of paternal postpartum depression increases risk for mother and child. I mention this because we have been blind for decades to the fact that fathers can also become depressed. Why does that matter? Because if he happens to be partnered with a woman, 1 in 8 have postpartum depressions, which is a serious illness. It's easily treated if you recognize it. But in many of those women, if they are partnered also with a man who is depressed, her depression will be very bad indeed, not only for her, but also for the child. Finally, one of the more interesting pieces of science up here, a father's vocabulary is a stronger predictor than a mother's of a child's language competence at 36 months of age. How does that work? Well, one of the things we notice is that fathers speak to their babies in a way slightly different than the way mothers speak to their babies. Mothers speak to their babies in soft, cooing sounds, often not full words, half songs, half nursery rhymes. Fathers, when they speak to their children, often use full sentences, big words. The mothers often kind of laugh behind the back, saying, "That child can't understand that." But when you ask the father will say, "They're not going to be cooing to him when he goes to school. I want him to understand. These are our words. This is our language, and I will keep him informed of the way that I want him speaking." She may roll her eyes, think he's cute or wrong, but it's not going to change the father's attitude. And look what happens later, 3 years later, at the age of 36 months. That child's language competence is directly tied to the father's vocabulary, not the mother's. Finally, the significance is co-parenting partner in toddlerhood and again in adolescence. Toddlers are a particularly tough time for parents because the toddler is interested in becoming themselves. Their favorite word is no, because they hear it so much, I think, but they also use it a lot. And so co-parenting feels a lot of stress. So when the father is supportive of the mother during this time, the child's temper tantrums are less frequent. And the child is able to get through this period, which we call the terrible twos, without much damage. Love this picture. But I want you to read the caption. It is the superscript, it is the primary task of every society to teach men how to father. One of the great anthropologists of any age, Margaret Mead, was the one who said this. I still do not understand what it means. Well, a student was the one who brought this to our attention. I'd be interested in what you think it means. I have some guesses. Maybe it's that if the society doesn't do it, it will get itself in trouble by having non-nurturing families. Maybe the men can't learn this on their own and they need some instruction. Or if men are not interested in the care of their children, maybe the wrong values will move forward in their society and that culture will not succeed. It's a very interesting question, but I hope this image, which I've seen a lot of, by the way, not this particular man and baby, but as Marsha and I have been around your beautiful city and its parks, we've seen several examples of this every day. Okay. Now, This is a somewhat troublesome slide, and I'll explain to you, but I think it reflects a reality that we need to come to grips with, those of us who think about the well-being of our families. On the left side of the slide is the axis called marital satisfaction. How happy are you with your spouse? And that is grafted against the age of your children. The 4 colors represent 4 international studies that have looked at the same issue. And as you look carefully, I can see some of you frowning a little bit. Yes, it is true. Even before the child is born, marital happiness is headed south. And as the child advances in age, it does not get any better. In fact, the slope is quite heavy through the first 3 years of life, and it just keeps going down. We stop at 14 and a half because we think that's discouraging enough. But it is a fact of life that as children's needs find their way into our intimate relationships, our happiness often begins to become harder to come by.
Kyle, it might be worth adding here that the drop is more precipitous if the couple starts having children when they're less happy. If they're happy, it's less of a decline, because whatever you have to work out between the two of you every day gets multiplied when you have a child. And then it gets multiplied again when you have your second, and your third, and your fourth. And couples who think they can work it out, as soon as they are outnumbered by their children, they find it more difficult to have time or energy to work anything out. So this represents a general decline, but for those of you who might be sitting there saying, oh no, we're doing okay, I don't want to do that. Know that if you're doing okay, it's not going to fall quite as much. And if you're not doing okay, you don't have that child hoping it will get better, because it will go down further.
So does that mean having children to save a shaky marriage?
Bad idea.
Not a good idea. At least if we were going to make decisions according to graphs, which we shouldn't, but we shouldn't be ignorant of this as well. Okay, why is it so complicated? This is one of the reasons it's complicated. This is a triangle that talks about the differences between co-parenting systems. In other words, men and women who are negotiating the needs of a child in the middle of their relationship, okay? This is why that graph is going down. Not because kids are there to kill marriages or families, they're obviously not. They make marriages often the time and make families into the wondrous things they are. But it's not easy. So, couple systems just refer to what's going on between mom and dad, that top line. Mothers and fathers have a lot to do with each other's relationship. I love you, I hope someday I will love you. This idea was our parents' idea. I usually go along with their ideas, but it's going to be up to you and me to prove them right or wrong. But I believe this, you believe this. Should we have kids? Should we not? What about your work? What about my work? All those things. That's mother-child. That's on the mother-child axis at the top. The mother-father axis at the top. The mother-child axis is one we know a great deal about. You mentioned bonding, attachment, all of the relationship theory and information. You heard Nancy Close, Dr. Nancy Close, in the first one of these workshops talk about attachment and explain why that was so important to get together. I'm here to sort of take that conversation one step further. But you'll notice that arrow goes both directions. There's traffic going both directions. If that baby is an easy baby, easy to sleep, easy to feed, that mother is feeling like she really is a good mother. She really knows what she's doing. But if that baby has something like colic or has a birth challenge, is difficult to sleep, difficult to feed, the mother is often going to feel, I don't know what I'm doing. This is distressing. I'm not making my child very happy. So that relationship can also become complicated. The father-child axis, something on which I've spent much of my research life, is just as sensitive to the traffic going both directions as the mother-child axis. The father can feel very competent if he's got a child who is easy to please and easy to regulate. He will feel the opposite if the child is difficult, feisty, hard to control, full of temper and full of spirit, and he's a quiet, laid-back man. So that's the traffic in the roundabout on the outside. What I'm really interested in is what happens on the inside of the roundabout. That mother can make the father-child axis very complicated by saying, I don't want you near our child. You don't know what you're going to do. You're going to drop him. I don't like the way you talk to him. I did not have a very good relationship with my father. I don't think men do fathering very well. I don't want you near him. And so the father can be left out of that's called gatekeeping, and Marsha will be talking with you a little bit later about that. Or she can say, I loved my dad, I loved my relationship with him, I want you to be in that relationship with him as well. It made me very happy, it makes me happy to do that now. So she can open the gate, or she can close the gate. Father can make the mother-child axis quite successful by being supportive, as you mentioned, by being loving, by being forgiving. But if he's difficult and demanding and authoritative and makes her feel like she doesn't know what she's doing, he can make this quite a difficult relationship to bring to fruition. And the child has quite a bit of influence on how the mother and father do with each other. Again, if the child is easy, and supposedly 60% of children born in the world are easy, I don't see very many of them, but that's what the statistics say. They will feel like they're great parents. Let's have a mess of kids. They'll find out later on that wasn't quite so easy if they have another one that's a little bit more difficult. But the child can bring that to fruition or can make it very frustrating, not through any will they have, but who they are. So this is why I think Margaret Mead is telling us to pay attention to this, and why we need as cultures to support these early relationships. Okay, I'm going to share an image with you that I think reflects pretty accurately what I have come to understand children hope they are part of in their lives. What is the image of in their minds of what they hope they will belong to? This is a beautiful sculpture by Ruth Bloch that encapsulates a circle of care and love and comfort and safety, and the circle is not complete without the mother and the father. And the child is in the middle, looking at both of them and clinging to both of them. So if we get lost about what's important, I think keeping an eye on what the child has can keep us from being confused. But that's all nice and very artistic, but is there any science that says children even respond to men, especially early when I'm talking? Well, there is, and it's intriguing. Some of it's rather old, but I bet none of you have heard of it because we don't talk about it very often. It's hard to make an influence over the noise created by attachment theory. But here's a piece of information I want to share with you. 6-week-old babies respond differently to their mothers and their fathers. 6-week-old. They're barely dry. But mother goes to pick up that baby. What do you see? You see the baby's eyes begin to close slightly. Shoulders relax. Ah, mom. Heart and respiratory rates slow. 6 weeks of age. Father goes to pick up the baby. You see the eyes open. Heart and respiratory rates go up, and the shoulders go up, as if to say, Father, playtime, or something. We don't know exactly what's on his mind. But the anticipation is not necessarily one of comfort and moderation. It's one of novelty and excitement. What's it doing in the child if it has no purpose? Biologically, neurobiologically, evolutionarily. Well, imagine the benefit of knowing who can feed you from their body and who can't. I think that'd be a good thing to know. What happens if a sandstorm is coming? It would be better for you to be in his arms than hers because he can run faster. So, maybe a good reason, maybe. Toddlers use clearer behavioral cues with their fathers than with their mothers. Mothers will often read their children's needs before a child even has the word finished. The juice is in their hand, or the blanket is around their shoulders. Father will wait. Say, what do you want? Say it. I want to hear it. Why are you doing that? Well, the world will not finish his sentences. He will have to learn to speak for himself to get his needs met and to be an honored member of the community. And so I want him to say it. Oh, you're so demanding. No, it's a good thing for our children. And you know, they're both right. Preschoolers use more advanced speech with their fathers, which I've already talked about. And this, I hope, rings a certain resonance for some of the things that you heard from Dr. Close's presentation about the importance of early cue reading and need satisfaction in the early years. Okay, if those are some of the differences, how do they translate into the father-mother domain? Because we talked earlier about the fact that mothers don't mother and fathers don't father. And I'm going to ask you for some of your own examples after I go through a few. Preparation for activation and stimulation versus soothing. Mothers often hold their children to comfort them and soothe them. They hold them like this. 9 times out of 10, they'll pick them up exactly the same way, over and over again, with a rhythmic beauty. Fathers, what's predictable is that 9 times out of 10, it will be unpredictable. That father holding his child up in the air, you see that a lot more than you see this. And you'll see fathers wanting to activate, even roughhouse a little with their children. We were in the Marina Mall today and watched a father pick a baby up out of a stroller where he was fussing, and his mother was clearly at the edge of her competence. I mean, her patience, not her competence, her patience. And he, big trouble, sorry. Picked the baby up, and the baby just wanted to squirm around and couldn't be quiet. And the baby wanted to crawl right over the father's shoulder, and the mother looks startled because the baby does get over the shoulder, but the father has the baby's foot securely in his hand and hangs the baby over the back. And the baby is so delighted, just squealing with laughter, and the mother rolls her eyes. And the father just walks on down the mall with his child hanging upside down over the back of his shoulder. But he was quiet, and he was pleased, and he was having a new experience. Now, they're both right. The mother knew the child was tired and they needed to get going, but the father knew a little surprise right here might buy them both a little more time. So I want you to start imagining the child who has these experiences both woven into their lives. It's a safety net without a hole. Preparation for place in the world versus relationships. I've already talked a little bit about that. In the world of discipline and limit setting, which once again you'll see focused on exclusively by Dr. Michael Kaplan as the last one of these workshops, I believe, in several months. I want to talk about this in terms of the mother-child, mother-father distinction. Mothers tend to discipline their children by letting them know when they misbehave. There is a price to be paid in my affection for you. I may still love you, but I'm not feeling very close to you right now when you're not listening to me or when you're disobeying me. When you start to behave, we'll be close again, but not right now. A father often won't go down that road in terms of disciplining or limit setting. Will often say something to the child, stop that behavior. You'll never have any friends or get a job if you keep acting that way. And he's conveying a message. The real world will need you to behave better than you are behaving now. Get to work on it. The mother said, the world will not be a trustworthy place in your relationships if you cannot listen to other people's needs and what they need you to do. Again, both right. Frustration tolerance versus facilitating. Mothers will often, they see a child struggling to pull on a shoe or struggling to cut a piece of meat. They'll often just simply come over and finish the job, take care of it. Fathers will often sit back and wait for the child to try to finish the job on their own, may give some instruction, but is less likely to move right in very quickly. The mother often feels frustrated by that. But the father will often explain they're not going to be cutting the crust off his bread at the university. He's going to have to learn how to do it. And I'm here to support him while he does. And so you'll see this frustration tolerance in men differently from women. So these are some of the different trends that we see in distinguishing styles between mothers and fathers. Now, we still have our microphones. I'm wondering what you have noticed yourselves about maternal versus paternal differences.
So my first thought was, there's a lot of behavior that you're describing as paternal that I tend to exhibit as well. So am I kind of creating an imbalance at home? I mean, a lot of this, frustration tolerance or real world kind of discipline, I do as well. So should I not be doing that?
Not at all. These are trends. In every relationship, who you are is bigger than the trend. So in your family, you might do more of what we would call typically paternal behaviors. The question is, does your spouse do some of those other more maternal behaviors, or do you do them when they're needed? But the exact balance, it's not a chemistry experiment with 68 and 46%. It may be 70-30 or 80-20, because who you are is still bigger than your gender. So if you can be both of those, it's very good for the child. And you may be both yourself, or you may be both together. If you're not, this is a good thing to go home and talk about. But if you are, don't worry about the mix.
Any other observations?
There's one right here.
Thank you.
Hi. The example that you give us about on dining, when you cut the meat, when the mother cut the meat for the baby while the father waiting and give the baby chance to do it by himself, this is exactly what's happening in my house with my child. So I think we are doing the both. We have the both examples, maternal and parental. So I think, as you said, this is good things for the baby or for the child to do this.
That's exactly. Having both is great, and sometimes it's important, whichever one of you does what's the harder job at the moment, it's important that the other parent comes in and supports them. So I shared a long story yesterday. I'll share the short version today, is that when Kyle and I have our two youngest children, when they are still sort of fighting with each other and getting undisciplined, Kyle will say to them, knock it off. And they do. I will say to them, why do you treat each other like that? What makes you think it's okay to do that to your brother? Why would you want to do that? Then they start explaining it, and in the process of that, they start fighting again. Well, no, he did it. Well, no, he did it first. And Kyle will say, I don't care why they did it. They just need to stop. Now, what's really important about that is sometimes when I then go to say, stop it, they won't stop. because they know if they keep going, they'll engage me in a discussion. I know at least one of the fellows from the foundation is interested in social emotional learning. Our children are very good at talking about their feelings. We have made sure of that. And it's very nice to have a son who is so sensitive. But every once in a while, I want them to take me more seriously. And if Kyle is around, he'll say, "Did you just hear your mother? Do what she says." Now, I'm not worried that that takes away from my authority. What I like is that the message is, do what she says, because I'm behind her. And later, when they come to complain to me that he's too bossy, he's too strict, I will do, and they will do that, I will do the same thing. And I'll say, your father is strict because he knows what's good for you. And he was right, and I should have gotten you to be quiet. So you can play those differences off. And when you do, what your children learn is that, oh, I've got less wiggle room here. Between mom and dad, I need to start listening, and it's okay for me to figure out what I feel in the process. So it's a good thing for everybody.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Any other suggestions, ideas, examples? Yes. Hi.
Thank you. One quick question. On these maternal and paternal behavior trends, are they impacted by the sex of the child?
We get that question every single day. You'd like to answer it? They're not so much. It is true that fathers will play a little wilder and harder with their sons, and sometimes they are a bit more strict with them than they are with their daughters, but the differences are smaller than you might expect or think. Do you want to add anything to that?
I did want to add something that I also learned in my own family.
See, he's coming in to support me again. Thanks, babe.
There is a difference in the mind of the parent. I have 3 daughters and 1 son, and he came last. And when I was disciplining my daughters, I often felt a confidence in knowing what they needed and what my job was. But I'm always a little back on my heels because I have never been a woman. I've never been in their heels, in their shoes. And they know something about how to get around me in some way. And I think, as clever as I am, I've blocked all the ways, but they'll always be ahead of me. Sometimes they exploit that, sometimes they don't. When I'm disciplining my son, I'm on my toes. I'm looking him right in the eye. I know exactly what is on his mind and what he's trying to do. So that has to do with my reaction to the gender of my children, not necessarily the gender of the children. But I think we spend a lot of time on the unimportant component here, which is not the difference between boys and girls, but the remarkable similarity between boys and girls and their needs. When we were talking about parenting in the first slide, we didn't say parenting boys and parenting girls. We said parenting everyone. Thank you. Father-child interactions. We know that one of the things that fathers mean to children is that they are the first important non-mother relationship in their lives, the first significant other. And so fathers have a very big role in helping their children learn how to be autonomous, how to be perfectly fine and safe a few inches away from mom, a few feet, a few miles, maybe even a country or two away from mom. It's a gradual process. But the child notices the father is separate from the mother. He goes and comes all the time. They're still friends. Maybe I can figure out a way to be a little further away from my mother. And maybe he has the key to teach me how to do that without hurting her feelings. We talked about across the ages, the responsibility of the fathers, how they change over time. Fathers very interested in their children's skill building, getting good at getting strong, getting a good sense of their own competence. That's true physically, it's true intellectually, it's also true morally. So that the child gets a sense of what they are able to do, not only as a loving and comfortable human being, but also as someone who can be separate from the mother as well. This may be one of the most important slides I show you all evening. Marsha and I have put this together. It is 300 some odd studies, some international. Child outcomes of involved fathering. This is one of the reasons that the Salama Foundation invited Marsha and me to come, because they have had the wisdom of weaving together the importance of early intervention with competent support for the changes that are occurring in the family. Because, yes, we're happy if mothers and fathers are happy, but we're especially happy if children have very good outcomes. And this is what the list looks like of positive paternal engagement and child outcomes down the road. And I've divided them behavioral, educational, and the next slide is social emotional. But to start at the first, less contact with juvenile authorities. You're not going to be in trouble with as many people, the principal, the police, if you have learned how to manage your own frustrations, speak for yourself, and solve problems without being aggressive. You will stay under the attention of the authorities and live your life more peacefully. Delay in initial sexual activity, very important. If you've had the love and affection of a father in your life, you will feel quite confident about the boundaries around your body, and you're not going to be violating them or looking for love in all the wrong places. Less reliance on aggressive conflict resolution. Remember what we talked about early on about speaking for yourself, the capacity to debate and negotiate for yourself comes out of those early lessons with your father. And so you don't need to pick up a weapon or hit someone. Educational, higher grade completion and income, a very important value. Stick with your studies. I believe, remember that reading we did when you were little? It really mattered to me too, that you understand that vocabulary strength that we talked about. Men don't even know they're doing it, but they're contributing. And of course, grade completion leads to income. Higher math competence in girls. This was a surprise finding in a study of the first 276 undergraduate women who attended MIT, which is a well-known educational institution in the United States, which used to be all male. Now it's females as well. They had a very high percentage of men who were deeply involved in their lives as their fathers. There's something about having your dad interested in your mind, not just your beauty or your charm, that makes you want to continue to develop it. Greater verbal strengths in boys and girls, we've already talked about that, but just to, once again, if one of the goals is to raise literacy levels, engage fathers early in the lives of your children. And finally, emotional, greater problem solving, stress tolerance. I don't throw a temper tantrum when I'm struggling with stress. I figure out a way of how to get my stress down and solve it. Greater empathy and moral sensitivity. And again, most of these are obvious by mid to late adolescence. But it's not just the children that are changed, it's also the men. And this is often a surprise list to men when I share it with them. It's interesting, the wives are not so surprised, but the men usually are. Increased longevity. I know it doesn't feel like that when you're doing it, because it's such a hard task, but it does increase the length of your life to become a father. The length of your marriage also lengthens. The level of health. You may put on a few pounds because you're not moving around as much, but overall your level of health will be higher. Responsibility for relationships. There are changes triggered by your closeness to your children which change your brain. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in another slide. decreases in accidental death and suicide. That's reflected in the level of health going up, job change, aggression, and impulsivity. The neurobiological changes, then I'm going to stop for your questions, and then Marsha will finish the presentation with some new information on her own work. What's this new brain business? The Decade of the Brain made us take a look at some very important organs, including the father's brain. Neurobiological changes in the father and the mother as seen on magnetic resonance images that are different when a child is 2 weeks of age. In other words, the father's brain changes in one way, the mother's changes in another. This is the work of Ruth Feldman. Highly involved fathers show enhanced activity in the regions of the brain. This is just by having a kid and being close to the child physically, holding them, being supportive to them, comforting them. Bond formation, auditory processing, especially with the own baby's cry. They get better at picking out their baby's cry from any other baby's cry in 2 weeks. Discrimination between crying and laughing. They begin to understand the emotional content of nonverbal communication, something their wives have been hoping for years. And finally, the child unlocks that in them. And related to emotional intelligence, which you heard a little bit about last month from the brackets, when they were talking about the difference between cognition and emotional intelligence and its predictive value. I think we now have the science to say that's the place it's happening.
So just to make sure everyone's following that, in short, men who get involved with their children early have a higher emotional responsivity, which is good for their own self, it's good for their relationship with their wife, and it's good for their child. There's no downside to it. There's also some research showing that men who get involved with children very early, change their diapers, touch their bodies when they are naked, are less likely for the next 10 years to hurt that child or any other child. We heard that only recently in the UAE have you begun to think about whether you need to have standards in place for child abuse, child protection standards. If you're thinking about that, one of the ways that you can reduce child abuse is to get men more involved in a positive way. And Kyle and I have a program that's being done in various parts of the world that continues to show that across all different ethnic groups and racial groups, that when you get men and women feeling better about how they are working together as parents, regardless of whether they got together for love or for an arranged marriage or because their families thought it was good, if they work together, everything goes up. Father involvement goes up, child abuse goes down, but the marriage goes up, the child's behavior gets better, etc. Big bang for your buck.
I want to emphasize, I'm very glad you raised that, because this was a conversation we just had earlier today about your new child protection law effort. Once that law is in place, you will begin to think more clearly about how, and the reporting increases, you're going to be thinking about how could we possibly prevent this from ever happening in the first place. I hope you remember these slides. When the father is positively engaged with his child early in his life, it erects a barrier in the man from ever exploiting that intimacy with his child or any children. So when you're talking about preventive public health measures, this is a big bang for your buck.
Kyle, I'm going to suggest that I just say one or two more things, and then we just
Yep.
do the rest of the time of discussion and
Well,
questions.
unless there are any burning questions we should take right now.
Okay.
Okay.
I just see where we are in
I
time.
know.
Yes, hi, thank you very much, first of all. Second, I wanted to know that I'm a single mother, and to play the two roles, that to be a mother and at the same time to be a father, is very hard. and especially when when the father is not involved anymore to the family, or is not near to the kids, and doesn't know anything about them. So in this case, what do you suggest for me, and how can I treat the kids, especially when sometimes there's you know, the father when screaming or shouting or he giving orders for the kids, and at the same time I'm doing I'm the good mother and I'm loving them. It's very hard, and I don't know how to start with them, and when I should be in a good way with them.
Yes, it's a very important question. First of all, you don't need a mother and a father to raise your children in a healthy way. It makes it easier, but you don't need one. Second, if the biological father is not available or is not a loving man, you can grab any man in your child's world, then your brother, your uncle, your father can do the same job. When there's a biological tie, it happens easier. But grandparents and uncles and brothers should not be discounted. And having a male presence can come from anywhere, and it can help you. We show a film when we have more time of a young man that says, I never learned how to fix a roof because my father didn't live with us. And then my grandfather showed me how to fix the roof. And my grandfather talks to me when I'm not nice to my mother, and he has helped me become a man. So there's more than one route to go. Other questions? I'm going to add just two things, and then we're going to talk. One is, now, how does the rubber hit the road? So you got the research, you got the idea. What does this mean for us? The first thing it means is, so how do you keep and get men involved? First thing is to understand why they drop out. If men feel that they're not doing a good job making an income, they're more likely to drop out. They feel guilty if they're not making a good living. So that makes men pull away. That's one of the things you can think about when you think of policies that you can put in place. Men sometimes drop out because they are inexperienced. From the time women are little, they change diapers, they help in the house. Men don't do that. So when they get to be fathers, sometimes they have no idea what to do with a crying baby. And this is a generalization, but generally, men don't like to be in a position of feeling incompetent. They want to feel like they know what to do. So if they're inexperienced, then they pull back, because then they don't have to figure it out by asking the mother or by being embarrassed. And so one of the things we've done is had small groups of men come together and teach each other things. And the men don't want to know how to change a diaper sometimes from their wife, but they want to learn it from another man. And they want to talk to another man about, well, what did you do when you were in this situation? Another thing is exclusion from the child's life. Every night that we've talked, we've had many questions about divorce. And while Kyle's expertise is in infants and toddlers, I am one of the experts on divorce in our country. And any question you have, I will be glad to try and answer. But many men leave the family either by their choice or because something happens between them and the mother, and it makes it much harder for them to be involved. And the other thing is sometimes children who are older make it harder for them to be involved. They say, you hurt my mother, you let us down, you have another family, I don't want to be with you. And that gives a child a decision-making power they should never have. So what do you do with that? Also, in terms of child care, in terms of health, do your hospitals and your doctors look for both mother and father. We had one of your forms in our hand the other day, and it said, name of parent. And then it said, name of nanny. It never said name of other parent. You got mother's name and you got nanny's name. Every form that you fill out for school or for health should have mother's phone number and father's phone number. I know that the men carry cell phones. You are on them on the streets and in the restaurants. Today we were eating lunch and we saw this family, and dad was on his cell phone and mom was on his cell phone, and little baby who was about 3 had propped up a little iPad, and they were all sitting and staring. And then there was little baby who was staring out the window with no one to talk to. That kind of not being together is very isolating. But we also know you answer your cell phones, so you should be reachable by any time the teacher needs to reach you. Maybe she'll call you if you're sick. We heard a story since we've been here about a father who said, I would like to pick my child up at school. Is that okay, or do I need to bring my wife? And the school was shocked. They said it never occurred to us that he wouldn't think he could come pick up his son. But he didn't know that he was invited. And then work-family stress. It's very stressful for men who work and women who work to figure out how to work and then also how to come home and be a parent and a spouse. One of the things that makes this not work so well is what we're going to call gatekeeping. Gatekeeping is the parent who's in charge decides who gets let in to my child's life and who doesn't. Who is safe, who's a good influence, how much time does my family get versus your family? How much time does this friend get to come over versus not? And one of the things mothers do is when the children are young, they keep father out, in part because they know that it's easier to do it themselves than to work it out between them, and in part because they figure they do it right and he doesn't do it right. And if they feel that way, he's going to go away. He's not going to offer because his way is different. Let me give you another example from your own group. The other night, someone came up after my talk and said, my child is learning English, and he's learning his ABCs, and I've been helping him every night. And the other day, he asked his father to help. And his father took the paper, and they wrote their ABCs, and it was all over the paper. It was on the front and the back and in the clouds. And I said to my husband, that's no way to teach him to write. He needs to write on the line. And she said, so I told him to go away. And now he doesn't help our son anymore. And I said, why did you tell him to go away? And she said, because he has to learn to write on the line. I said, then the teacher will tell him to write on the line, and he will learn. But at least he learned his ABCs. And he learned it from father as well as mother. He is more likely to teach it all over. But you know what? He's a lot more fun than you. It's much more fun to write it upside down than to write it on the line. So don't cut that fun out of his life. Let him be. Those are the kinds of gatekeeping. And what gatekeeping is to men is, I know that I can be involved if she lets me, if she invites me in, if she helps me be a good parent. And this is some research I've done. I'm not going to go into the long and short of it, but mothers feel like it's their job to help him be a good parent. And the more they endorse that, the more she invited him in. And the more she invited him in, the more they had all these positive outcomes. Higher levels of cooperation, higher levels of shared child rearing, lower conflict, lower hostility, and greater father involvement. So all of that happened because she invited him in. So how do you get fathers involved? You ask them directly, and you mean it. You don't have a parenting program where he can't come because the hours aren't right, or there's 6 mothers and 1 father. And when he gets there, have something that he likes to eat. Have a magazine that he wants to look at. Have a Sports Illustrated, not just a fashion magazine while he's waiting. Invite him in. Mothers, don't tell him what he does wrong, don't fix it, and don't give him instructions. He doesn't like any of that. But instead, try and appreciate that he does it different. Somebody asks, doesn't that make our kid crazy if he gets them all riled up all the time? It doesn't make him crazy, because when he riles a child up, the man also says, all right, that's enough. It's time to stop now. All right, hey, you little squirt, you can't hurt me, I'm bigger. Cut it out. He teaches him not only to get excited, but to manage that excitement, and that turns into the positive outcomes Kyle talked about. So let me take a break there for a moment and see what this makes you think about. What are your questions about working together, about divorce, about your gender of your children, about special needs kids? Anything that you've been thinking and worrying about, this is your time. And we're all ears. Yes?
Hello, good evening.
Hello.
I'm a mother of a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, 2 boys.
Closer to the mic, thank you.
Closer, hi. I'm a mother of 2 boys, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. If you could talk a little bit about the difference in cultures between the mother and the father, because it depends then who raises how. Like, I come from a background, my husband comes from a different background. It's going back to that triangle that you said, because whatever I have in my mind, it's sometimes not the same as him.
Probably never.
So if you would like to talk about that a little bit, because it affects the children. Thank you.
Sure. Do you want to go first or second?
No, go ahead. I'll take so.
So having different cultures when they're very little, if you're not giving them consistent times to eat and sleep, it's a problem. But by the time they're 3 and 4, they know you're different. They don't mind that you're different. In fact, they kind of think it's nice that you're different. They figure out who to go to for what. So when I peed in my bed as a child, I went to my father because he threw a towel down and put me back to sleep. My mother, she stripped the bed, she made a new bed, she made it nice and clean for me, and she was always mad at him because he just put a towel down. I loved it. I was out of bed less. Kids know the difference. It's okay. Now, when the culture clashes, then you have to decide how to support each other. In what way will you always support his beliefs because you both agreed to raise your children that way, or you need to agree to raise them some way? So what can you live with and what can he live with? And then you support each other. And as they get older, you talk to them about, we don't quite agree on this, but we are going to support each other. And then they'll figure out for themselves. But there's some research that shows when children live in 2 different houses, if the parents are nice about it to each other and they don't talk badly about each other, those children sometimes are actually more mature and more adaptable than other children, because every environment's different. And one of the things you have to learn as a child is how to behave at school, how to behave at home. We have to learn how to behave at the office. I have to behave different when I'm here in Abu Dhabi than when I'm talking in Turkey or when I'm talking in Connecticut. And the more you can learn that it's okay that there are different rules and customs, and I can respect each and follow each, your children will have a great gift. So think of it as a positive.
I didn't hear all the second question.
That the question was 2 and a 4-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
They have different cultures and different beliefs. How do they work this out?
I have nothing to add.
I love it. I'll probably hear about it later.
That comes out of a lot of respect for Marsha's answer. But also the lessons that a 2-year-old will teach you or will need are so different than the 4-year-old. And the 4-year-old's use of language and the fact that he has a 2-year-old younger sibling make him feel like such a prince, right? And yet the 2-year-old has a power over him, which is that he doesn't care what anyone thinks of him. And so he will simply rule the roost from the younger position. And that's a whole other workshop. It's a whole to talk about sibling relationships, which of course are among the most interesting in our lives because they're the ones that stay with us forever. But thank you for your question.
And by the way, some other research shows that when fathers are positively involved, children have better sibling relationships later.
Right. More stable sibling relationships.
Yes.
Oh, this one here, sorry.
Oh, okay. We'll do this one and then come back to you.
Okay, me first.
That's all right. Go ahead.
Okay, I got a couple of boys, 5 and 9 years old, and they're not interested in sports or the things that all these boys of their age are supposed to be interested in, like soccer, football, swimming, riding bicycles. They're just hung up to the iPads. I don't know how to get them off the iPads and to make them interested in sports like their friends so that they have more friends. Maybe they're copying me. I'm not that physical kind of guy. I don't watch soccer on the TV. I don't watch these things. But I'd like them to have interest in these things like everybody else. So I don't know really what to do or how to handle it. It's on one side. The other side, I have another question is when sometimes I have a situation, I don't know how to handle it, or if my kid comes to me with a problem, I cannot solve for him, or I don't know how to advise him about it. Maybe I'm kind of a scientific guy rather than an academic guy, so I cannot preach. I don't know what to do. So what's the best way so that the child doesn't get affected or to get out of it so that I can do some research and come back to him later on and tell him what's supposed to do?
Gotcha. How old did you say your children are?
9 and 5.
9 and 5. So I don't know if everyone heard that, but we have a 9 and a 5-year-old. They don't play soccer, they don't swim, they like their iPad, and he also is not always sure how to give them advice when they need it. First of all, at 9 and 5, you can take their iPad away anytime you want. So that won't make them like soccer and swimming. They may not like soccer and swimming. That's okay. But if you want them to find other interests, you have to limit the time with the iPad.
And give them alternatives.
And give them alternatives that they like. Maybe they like theater, or maybe they like reading, or maybe they like playing some other card game. You can't make them like soccer and swimming, but you can broaden their world, get them involved in other things. So take them away from their iPad, and also check out how much you're spending time on your iPad. Because remember, people said, you're modeling. Oops, mom just gave me a thumbs up. That's right. They are learning by watching. And if you are always on yours, they think they can always be on theirs. And the second part of the question, which is if he doesn't always know how to give advice.
I think that's neither do I, okay? Let's be clear about that. My only hope is in following the advice from someone over here who said, you have to listen to your children. And what fails, advice often fails because you didn't hear the problem to begin with, or you rushed in with a solution. And to talk to a child about what they are having trouble with, you want to give them advice about handling a teacher, for example, at school. In order to get that advice through to them, they have to be part of a conversation with you about trouble that they are having with that teacher at school. So if you are aware that that's the issue, invite your child, say, we have something important to talk about that has to do with how happy you are in school with Mrs. whatever her name is, or Mr. Because I think it must be hard not to know what to do when the teacher's upset with you. So you listen. He may say, I don't have anything to say about that, or everything's just fine. And at that point, you can say, I'm going to be listening for this because I think it's not fine. I've been in a similar situation. I could probably help you, son. Then you don't push, but you have planted a seed. Your wife can support you and say, you know, your dad wants to hear what you have, why this is a problem for you. The two of you might be able to figure out an answer. But the failure to give advice is often rooted in the failure to listen in the first place, because you are often ready to give advice out of your own moral system, whatever that may be, or what's right and wrong, instead of understanding what the child is in distress about. But it's hard to pick. Your children will still talk to you at this age. You still have some time. So use the opportunity and say, I think maybe I haven't been listening to you carefully enough, because I know you're not listening to me. I'm ready to start listening a little better.
And that is especially important when your country is in the place it's in right now. It is changing so quickly. And so children feel very different than their parents. And it's very important to listen to what their world is and to hear what they have to struggle with, because if you just rush in to give advice from what it was like for you and what you'd like it to be for them, you're likely to miss how much the world has changed for them.
There are also some software programs that can allow you to play games with your children that will get you talking to each other. He's looking at me with skepticism. I think that
The man up there, you had your...
Yes. I was just wondering if time is a factor at all. Time spent with the child is a factor at all. I mean, on a good week, I see my kid, during the working week, probably 5 or 6 hours during that, 5 days. And then obviously try to spend as much time during the weekend. So I'm just wondering, is time a factor when you're looking at these positive outcomes?
I just finished a paper on that. So the answer is yes, no, yes. Yes, there's a basic minimum that you need to be around, and no one has studied what that minimum is. No, the amount of time is not nearly as important as the quality of time. There are studies that show if when you're with your child, you're really there, not on your phone, not doing the laundry or whatever you all need to do, but focused on the child, a little bit of time can make all the difference. Quality time. Although quality time has to be the child's quality. What parents often say about quality time is, I got 2 hours, so we got plenty of time. But your 2 hours may not be theirs. My kids never want to talk to me during my quality time. They want to talk to me when I'm supposed to be putting them to bed.
I want to talk to you during your quality time.
He always wants to talk to me. It's very frustrating because I'm trying to talk to them. He wants to talk to me. And then when it's bedtime, that's when they decide they really want to talk. Or I'm driving them to school, and as my daughter gets out of the car, she says, I did really poor on that science test the other day. What? You want to talk about this? Bye, Mom. Then after school, I say, about that science test. And she says, never mind that. I've had a whole day since then. Right? So, yes, quality time, but make sure it's when they need you, not when you need them. If it's the only time you have, go with it, be sensitive, enjoy it, be there for them, and it will probably turn out fine.
Sensitive parenting is delivered in small moments, not big ones. Sensitive parenting is delivered by divorced and non-divorced parents in the same way. And when you are sensitive to the needs of your child and you put them down with the right touch, or you read them at the right moment, that's what they remember. And they feel a security that they can count on your knowing of them forever. And that is such an important center stone to the growth of their entire life. And so even though you may not feel you're contributing much, if you are truly there when you are there, you're doing a wonderful job. That's true if they're in or out of a marriage.
If it was only about time, when you walk in the door, they would say, Father's home, big deal, back to my books. That's not how it is. It's, Father's home, and they go running to you. When they stop being excited to see you, that should tell you that you need to spend a little more time. But as long as you have
that they're growing up.
or that they're teenagers, yes, that's a different story. But as long as they're willing to engage with you, take the time you have. Yes?
Yes, when you have many children, like here you have many families with 4 or 5 children, I read about time that you need to spend with each child, let alone other children. So the dad will spend some time with the daughter alone and then separately for the mother. How do you feel about that?
Go ahead.
Time alone with the child is a gift almost beyond measure. Hardly any of us have enough time. And yet, when we have multiple children, the successful families are ones that do allow a rotational basis that allow you to have some time alone with your child. Not every day, maybe not every week, but some of the very large families that we have encountered in the Middle East, for example, figure out ways to have that time alone. It may take a month to rotate through the whole family, but it is a sign of respect, very important respect, for the mother to make that time work for the father to make that time work for the mother. And children of varying ages hunger for it differently. Teenagers may not want any of it. School-age children are especially appreciative of time alone because they know how to use it. Very young children simply expect it, so it's not a treat. So during that preschool through pre-adolescent time, it's especially worth the trouble. Doesn't have to be a half a day, it can be a couple of hours where the attention is focused on that child. Men are often very comfortable inviting the child into their world for that time to help them make sure they feel competent what they're teaching their child. That's perfectly fine, as long as he's not ignoring the child, ignoring what the child needs, focused on what the child is learning in the experience. We are big fans of it as a preventive measure to loneliness, isolation, etc. And it's a lot of fun to stay in love with your children as a parent, and that's a good way to do it.
Yes.
Thank you so much for this lecture, and thanks for the organizers, especially when my wedding is at the end of this month. And yeah. And so I find it really interesting. And the question is, or not the question, I have a comment when we go back to the chart that you say the relationship between the wife and the husband, on the other hand is the children age. I think here in Emirates is the opposite. Before the first child is born, I think the relationship is fluctuating, and when they get the first child, the graph will go up, I think, significantly. And then I don't know what happens later, but this is what I have noticed at the first days. They get together, and the relationship or the emotional part of their relationship will be increased after like the first few months at least. What is your comment about this?
You're right that if you're excited about having a child together, that graph is over a long period. But the first 3 months are, in our country, we call them the honeymoon period. It's when everything is wonderful. It's when you're just so excited to be together and everything is new. And until you're really exhausted and not sleeping enough, then you begin to maybe feel different. But yes, it's a wonderful time of life too. And don't feel that because things can be hard, that they stop being wonderful, because they don't. And one of the things we're very worried about for families is when you stop feeling like having children is wonderful and being with your children is wonderful. If you're feeling that way, either as a family or as a culture, then you have a serious problem. Because for the family to thrive, there has to be a lot of enjoyment and joy. Not every day and not every moment, but overall, it should feel like that. I'm glad that you feel that it will. Hold on to that. Don't lose it.
Yes.
I don't know how to say it, but I have the similar problem like a guy, like the guy who spent a minimum time, like 6 hours a week in his house. But I have no problem with my children, but my wife has. The wife always complaining about the kids, and she said, your kids are angels in front of you. The moment I went out of the house, the kids fighting, screaming, but when I'm in the house, they're like an angel, playing, quiet, and how can I fix that?
Father involvement gone awry.
So you have brought her question here this evening.
Where is she?
She's in Al-Ain, I'm in Abu Dhabi.
I see.
But she's not home with the children. Okay, just checking.
Do you want to take?
Go ahead.
That's not the first time I've heard of that, okay? And it's often, how old are your children? I'm sorry.
One is 6 years old and the other is 2.
6 and?
2.
2.
And 2. Well, enjoy it, because it will not last for long.
I'm enjoying.
Okay, good. But often what she's conveying to you is that your children are so happy to have your attention, and that they are willing to show you only one side of who they are. And that doesn't mean they're afraid of you, but it does mean they have made a decision about who you are and what you would like to see in them, and they show it to you, because it brings them a lot of pleasure to make you happy. She, on the other hand, does not see that as a solution. She wants them to also show you what they're showing her, which I assume is not angelic, right? Yes. It's disobedient, it's disrespectful, it's all of those things which they do not show you. Now, there is a little bit of science that says to us that children are less likely to fight with their fathers during this very period before they go to school. And they're more likely to be in a little bit of a highly affectionate, appreciative time with their fathers, because they're learning to separate themselves from their mothers. So they need to be angels in front of you so that you don't give up on them like she has, which of course she hasn't, but they may think that. This is often called another kind of honeymoon period. So if you want to help her with that, you can speak to your children directly about the way they treat her, about how much you love her, how much you care for her, and that you do not like it when people are rude or not respectful of her. And you are keeping your eye on that. And you should say that to them in front of her so that she hears you. That's my advice for that, and it will all be changed in about 2 years. And you'll be on the same side. Good luck. Thank you for your question.
There was one question. There you go.
Earlier that
Sarah.
yes, you said earlier that let's say the mother is a single mother, then the child needs to have an exposure to a male figure, right?
I didn't say they need to. I said it's a good thing to.
Okay, because I was going to ask, what if that figure was their teacher? My question is really, do they have to have an emotional bond between, do we need to have an emotional bond between the child and that figure, or is it just the exposure to?
Ideally, it's the bond that matters. So it's not just exposure to any male, but it's to a male who will step in and roughhouse and say that's enough and support your mother. So I just want to be absolutely clear. What I said was that you will be fine, likely, as a single parent. You don't have to have two parents raising a child to be okay, but it is a risk factor. It is harder, and it makes everything more difficult. But if that's all you have, then be the best parent you can be, and often that is enough. But it is stronger for you to invite in a male that creates a bond with your child. You look like you're dying to say something.
I am, thank
Go
you.
ahead.
When you first said this, you left out one qualifying factor, which you usually say, which is this man must be emotionally important to the mother. She must respect him. She must value his contribution to the family. It can't be just anybody. It has to be someone whom she trusts and with whom she can collaborate in the care of this child. It doesn't have to be permanent and forever, but the child will see in the mother's eye that this relationship has her approval and her trust. If that doesn't happen, the child will back away. It will not be, the children are wonderful diagnosticians around trust. And so they are likely to back away at that particular moment. So I think what Marsha was saying about risk factors, it is harder to do it alone, especially if you're a little poor, if you're a little isolated, if you don't have community and family support, and if you have your own mental health issues. It can be very difficult. But it's the accumulation of all those risk factors that make it especially hard. But if you can address each one of those risk factors, then what Marsha was saying about the literature, children of divorce or single father are far from doomed. No way.
But the person only has to be important to mom if it's a young child and he is co-parenting with you.
Yes, right.
If he's a role model in your child's life, if he is a favorite coach for football or soccer, that can also be very helpful. And you have to respect him, but you don't have to have a very close relationship with him.
We have time for one more question, and then we need to honor your time as well.
Hi. My question was about, it's just, I have a 4-year-old son, and where do we draw the line? I mean, I'm quite playful with him, and we have a lot of fun. I'm talking about it from an authoritative kind of point of view. And also the influence of the grandparents. I mean, in Eastern society, like, families can become very influential, like grandparents, for instance. And they saw us playing together one time, they were like, oh, don't do that because he might not respect you, or when he grows up, he'll always see you as being like very friendly. Like from a fathering point of view, I mean, my father passed away when I was quite young. And for instance, my father-in-law, who's an amazing person, a person that I have a lot of respect for, he saw us playing together one time. He was like, oh, okay, just take it easy, you know. He might grow up and he'll be really too playful with you, or, you know, you won't have that kind of much authority over him, you know. So I just want to know, first of all, I mean, how much influence can grandparents have on us as young parents? And the second thing, where do you draw a line, like authoritatively? I mean, do you just keep playing with them and hope that everything will be all right one day, or, you know, just a bit of advice, that's all.
Yes. Do you want to go first, second?
You go first.
Okay, so let's take the one about where do you draw the line. So go back to the slide where Kyle talked about sensitive parenting being everything. If you push it to where you're hanging him upside down till he throws up, or you are playing with him until he cries himself to sleep because he's so tired, you've crossed the line. You know the line by watching him and knowing when he's had enough. Whatever age, he will turn from you, he will say stop, he will try and do something else, he will say, no, Papa, no. Whatever language he gives you, that's when it's enough. And if he's not there, you're fine. Second, grandparents. Grandparents they're a tricky business. They're there to support the family. But one of the things that grandparents and children have in common is sometimes the way they gang up on the in-between generation, right? So grandparents sometimes will overreach right over your head to tell you how to raise your child.
We have a saying in English, the reason that grandparents and grandchildren are so close is that they have a common enemy. That would be you.
So, and we're grandparents, and when my son-in-law throws our grandchildren up in the air, I will say to him, don't do that over the marble floor. Do it over the bed. And he'll say, it's fine. It has to be fine. So do grandparents have as much power as you and your partner let them have. And they should have a great place, and I know they do in your culture as they do in ours, great place of respect and of love and affection. But sometimes they're from a different time. They have a different way. And so you need to, together as a couple, say to them, please just let me parent my own way. I appreciate so much that you give me advice, and this time I'm not going to take it. And you have to back each other up for your own parents, because it's easier to do to your own parent than your spouse's parent.
And one final piece of advice, there is no one line to draw. You will be drawing 1,000,000 lines before you leave this life. And the child and you will each draw your own lines. The idea is that you know what's best for him in a way that he doesn't, and you convey that to him through these micro moments.
And you also know your child better, what's best for them better than the grandparents might. But you have to find a way to help them feel included and respected as you draw your lines. So we want to let you go and honor your time, but if anyone had a burning question that they didn't get to or were embarrassed to ask publicly, we will be around, and we were happy to talk a little further.
And two other things, the focus groups.
You have
Yep,
another slide.
I do. The focus groups have been talked about, I believe. Okay, great.
Yes? Anyone who's interested in staying around and talking a bit more and answering some questions in a small group, you can meet right over here when we're done.
And to say to the assembled multitude, the appetite for talking about your experience with each other is very great in this room, and we have noticed this in our visits throughout the UAE, the desire to support each other and each other's common experience. And I really do hope that you are able to find each other for those group experiences. Finally, does this slide make more sense to you now than it did when I first showed it to you? I hope so. That's been the purpose of our evening. We also want to let you know that the following workshop will focus, Dr. Henderson's workshop will focus on nutrition and physical activity, which you've heard a new meaning for tonight. And that will be next month?
April 15th, it's up there.
Oh, sorry, it's up there. Thank you very much for your attention. We have very much enjoyed our time with you this evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.